So today the church celebrates the memorial of St. Catherine of Siena, virgin and doctor of the church. Very likely you know what it means to be a virgin, so I'd like to talk about being a doctor of the church. So currently there are about 37 doctors of the church, predominantly male. And there are 4 female doctors of the church so far, and St. Catherine of Siena is one of them. And so the title of Doctor of the Church is reserved for saints whose writings and teachings have, significantly impacted the development of Christian doctrine and theology. So while the vast majority are men, there are 4 female doctors of the church. St. Teresa of Avila was proclaimed a doctor of the church in 1970, same year as St. Catherine of Siena that we celebrate today. Then St. Teresa of Lisieux was 1997, and then the last one, 2012, was St. Hildegard of Bingen. So what does it take to be a doctor of the church? Now, the process is a very rigorous one, and there are 3 steps towards being proclaimed a doctor of the church. The process relies on 3 specific criteria established by the Catholic Church. So unlike doctor in medical doctor, this title comes from the Latin word docere. Docere means to teach. So the first criterion is eminence doctrina, that is eminent learning. So the saint must have produced a body of work that provides a profound and lasting contribution to the church's understanding of faith and in morals. That's to say, their teachings must be eminent, meaning they must possess a depth that continues to be relevant even centuries later. The second one is insignis vitae sanctitatis, that is high degree of holiness. So first of all, the person must be a canonized saint. That means that the title is never given to someone who is only blessed or venerable. The idea is that their life must demonstrate heroic virtue, showing that their intellectual contributions were fueled by a deep, authentic and lived faith. Authentically lived faith. You understand what I'm saying? Then the third one is ecclesiae declaratio. Of course, you know, ecclesia is the church, declaratio from declaration, that is official proclamation of the church. This means that the title is not automatic. It must be formally conferred by either a pope or a general council of the church. So there is a thorough study of the saints' writings by the dicastery for the cause of saints. That would be a topic for another day, to be sure that there are no errors at all, either in doctrine or whatever. And you may be wondering, is there a difference between a father of the church and a doctor of the church? And yes, fathers of the church are specifically from the early centuries of Christianity up to roughly 8th century, and they helped establish the foundations of the faith. Doctors of the church, on the other hand, can come from any era of history of the church, provided their teaching has stood the test of time and there are no errors in their teachings. So in the Catholic Church, celebrating the memorials and feasts and solemnities of saints serves several distinct spiritual and communal purposes. At the core of these celebrations and commemorations, the practice is not about worshiping the individuals themselves, but about honoring the work of the divine through human history. So first we talk about them being living examples of virtues. So saints are viewed as heroes of the faith, just as a student might study a great scientist, or a musician might look up to, a great composer. Believers also look to saints to see how faith can be lived out in diverse circumstances. Their lives provide some kind of, what do they call it, practical roadmap for applying seemingly abstract spiritual principles to real world challenges, whether that involves courage in the face of persecution or lifelong service of the poor. Then secondly, there is also something we refer to as the theology of the cloud of witnesses, which is rooted in our belief in the communion of saints. So the concept suggests that the connection between believers who are still alive and those who are dead, that connection is not severed by death. So by celebrating a feast day, the community on earth joins with the community in heaven. It is a way of affirming that those who have passed away are still very much alive in Christ and remain part of the family of faith. Then encouragement and hope. Feast days and memorials and solemnities and commemorations generally serve as a reminder that holiness is attainable. So by highlighting people from all walks of life, doctors, farmers, kings, priests, lay, married and unmarried, and young and old and even outcasts, the church emphasizes that anyone can reach a state of spiritual fulfillment. So it humanizes the journey of faith, showing that even the saints had their struggles, they had their doubts, they had their flaws that they had to overcome to attain the degree or level of sanctity that they eventually did. They were human like us, so it's like telling us, fellow humans, allowed God's grace to accomplish such feats in them, you could do the same. Next is intercession and connection. So saints are regarded as advocates. So just as one might ask a friend on earth to pray for them, believers ask the saints to pray for them. So a feast day or memorial is a specific time to seek the patronage or help of a saint who might have a connection to a specific cause, a profession, or a personal struggle. That will be talk for another day too, if you remind me. Then the one that feels really beautiful to me, is so organized and so inspired, the liturgical cycle. So on a practical level, these celebrations help organize the year, the liturgical year, the year of the church. So they provide, how do I put it, what will sound poetic, some kind of rhythm to life, ensuring that throughout the year, different aspects of the Christian mystery are highlighted. And it's so beautiful, really beautiful. One of these days, we will talk about the arrangement of the liturgical year, the celebrations within the liturgical year. So I think that's enough. And just a little about Catherine, and we will call it a wrap. So Catherine was born in the 1300s, and she was the 24th out of 25 children. Whether her mama married past one, or papa married past one, I don't know, but I'll find out. So Catherine, from an early age, began experiencing mystical visions from a very young age, leading her to resist her family's pressure to marry. She wanted to just live in isolation. And I understand she joined the Immaculate, some lay women group that is associated with the Dominicans. So initially, she lived as a recluse in her own home, spending 3 years in silence and prayer. But she eventually felt a divine call to leave her cell and serve the world. So she wanted felt God was calling her to a contemplative life, but God said, no, I want you to be in the midst of my people. So she began caring for the sick and the poor, particularly those suffering from the plague and leprosy, often tending to patients that others wouldn't even want to have anything to do with. And something interesting in the life of St. Catherine of Siena that lets us know that where there is a will, there's a way. Despite largely being self-taught and unable to write for much of her life, she dictated her letters. She corresponded with popes, princes, and commoners alike, urging them toward peace and spiritual reform. So we understand that her most famous, if I should call, political intervention or political feat was convincing Pope Gregory the 11th to leave Avignon, France, and return the papacy to Rome. That was in 1377, ending decades of what they referred to as Babylonian captivity. Maybe someday we'll talk about that as well. So finally, her teaching. Now, St. Catherine of Siena's teachings are characterized by what we call mysticism of service. She believed that a deep private relationship with God should naturally flow into active love for other people. So her most famous work is called The Dialogue. The Dialogue. That dialogue records her conversations with God and outlines several central spiritual themes. She talks about the bridge. So Catherine's most famous metaphor is Christ as the bridge. So she describes humanity as standing on one side of a stormy river, that is the world's attachment to sin and pleasure and generally sin, and then God on the other side. Then there's a structure. So the bridge has 3 steps. There's the feet, there's the side, and then the mouth of Christ. That was how she described it, representing the stages of the soul's journey from the fear of punishment to love of virtue, and finally to a state of perfect peace and union with God. So the purpose of the bridge, that bridge was built because the river was impassable after the fall of humanity. So Christ provides a safe way to cross without being swept away by the water of worldly anxieties and troubles and failures and setbacks and all of that. Then she talks about the cell of self-knowledge. Excuse me. Catherine thought that we do not need to go to monastery to find God. We carry a cell within our souls. So she emphasized that we must know 2 things simultaneously. Our nothingness, that we do not exist without God, and then God's infinite love for us. So the balance is knowing our weakness alone leads to despair, and knowing only God's greatness leads to pride. So the cell is where these 2 truths meet, creating a humble but confident spirit. Then she talks about truth and love. So for Catherine, God is what we call in Latin prima dulce verita. That is the first sweet thing. So she believed that the intellect must first know the truth before the will can love the truth. So she also talks about the fire of charity. She often uses fire as a symbol. So just as fire consumes wood, God's love, that is charity, should consume the soul until there is no distinction between the will of the soul and the will of God. Then, active love. She's famously known for this. Be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire. That is a call to authenticity, that by living out one's divine purpose, a person becomes a catalyst for change in the world. Yeah, we generally, of course, we regard the church as the body of Christ. But despite being a fierce critic of the corruption she saw in the 14th century, Catherine remained deeply loyal to the church. So she referred to the Pope as the sweet Christ on earth. That's sweet. But this didn't stop her from writing him scathing letters when she felt he was filling his duties. So for Catherine, because we are all a part of one body, we are responsible for one another. No one goes to hell or heaven alone. Our virtues and vices affect our neighbor. That's it. And God bless you.